Hello, right, I am now getting along towards the end of the first side, if you like, of row 20 or round 20 on my pattern. I'm nearly at the thumb stitch. Do you remember I put that stitch marker in to show where that single thumb stitch was? But something's changing on round 20, and I've got some unusual symbols here that I've not encountered before. Let's just have a look at that in a little bit closer up. Okay, so this is just a enlarged version of that part of my pattern, and I'm talking about round 20, which shows me I'm used to this blue line going up the middle. This is the single blue thumb stitch we've been working, but then I've got something going on either side of that. If I hold that up, you can see there's two kind of little branches coming off of my thumb stitch. Now what they are the increases that are going to be worked up the thumb to give us an actual thumb that we can put our thumb in. Let's have a look on our completed mitten. So if I turn it on the side, there's the thumb, and if I turn it on the side, there's the blue line that we're very familiar with. But if I kind of turn it, or if I try and open it out just a little bit, and it is tricky because obviously it's been beautifully blocked, but if I just open it out a little bit, you can see how this shape here sort of corresponds to this sort of fanning out tree shape that's going on here. So what's happening is we're doing thumb increases. So we're used to having this blue thumb line going up, the blue thumb stitch we've been working with the clay either side to start and finish our mitt part, do you remember? But as we go up a little bit, you can see the branches kind of start to go out to left and right, and more stitches come in. So when we get to say here, we've got not just a blue stitch, we've got a cream stitch, a blue stitch and a cream stitch. And then when we get to here, we've got a blue stitch, a cream stitch, blue stitch, cream stitch, and so on. And that is all that's happening on our pattern, is our thumb increases are being brought into play. Now, we've got two kinds of increase for our thumb. We did talk about make one right already around the cuff area, but if you haven't seen make one right, let me get that out of the way. That is the symbol for make one right, and you know, you can see that kind of straight off that the branch, if you like, is pointing out to the right, and it will be no surprise to you to see make one left looks like that, with the branch pointing out to the left. So those are the increase symbols that you're going to see on that thumb part of the chart. So it's sort of intuitive, because everything to the right of this central blue stitch that we're going to do wants to point to the right, going to lean to the right, and everything to the left of that central blue stitch wants to lean to the left. So, you know, it's fairly obvious whether you're going to be going right or left on your increases. If you're right of that centre stitch, go right. If you're left of that centre stitch, go left. But what does make one right and make one left look like? Well, we'll do that in one little moment. I just want to go back and have another very quick look at this chart, because you can see it's a very even increase of stitches. We've got this lovely kind of inverted triangle kind of situation happening. It's a very even increase, and the way those even increases are achieved is that they happen on every other round. They don't happen every round. You get a much flatter triangle if you did it that way. It's a nice gentle slope, so that's happening because we're increasing on every other round. So let's work that and see what the make one left and the make one right work looks like in actual reality. Okay, so I've worked almost to the end of the first side of the mitten. I've just got to put those last 3 stitches in, and I know that they are 2 blue and 1 clay. I'm going to try, and it's a new day videoing for me today. I'm going to try very hard to only use the word clay from now on. Right, so that is my mitten part complete. I am now working on the thumb. Now at the moment the thumb hasn't got a lot to be said for itself. It is just 1 stitch. I'm just going to remove my stitch marker for now. That there, ladies and gentlemen, is the entirety of our thumb at the moment. So I'm going to increase my first stitch, because I've got that make one right. I've got that little symbol next in my pattern, and I'm going to make one right now. Before I do that, we've also got to remember that we are working Fair Isle, which means we've got more than one colour to think about. So we've got a central line going up of this blue stitch, going all the way up from the base of our thumb right the way up to the tip of our thumb. You'll see that later. We've got this central blue. And the whole thumb, we're very lucky because the whole thumb is just alternating colours, alternating between the seafarer and the clay, seafarer and clay. So we need to keep that pattern going. So when we do our increases, we just need to be mindful of whether the finishing or the resulting stitch needs to be seafarer or clay. Okay, so in this first scenario, we've just got one blue stitch at the moment. We're going to increase a stitch either side. So either side, that resultant stitch needs to be clay. Okay, else it will throw our pattern out completely. All right. So we know that our increase is going to be worked with clay on this round. Right, so it's to the right of our central seafarer stitch. I can see that because I haven't worked it yet, which means I've got to work a make one right. So with make ones, if you haven't seen it before, and I apologise if I'm repeating if you've watched all the videos, and if you have you need a medal, but if you haven't, make one right or left is always using that little bar that works, that's between the stitch. Okay, so it'll either be between the stitch you've well, it'll always be between the stitch you've just worked and the next stitch to come, and it's always going to be that particular bar. Okay, that bar that runs between the two. Just have a poke about on your knitting, you'll easily see it, it's quite obvious. And what we're going to do is we're going to turn that little bar into an extra stitch. The only difference between make one right and make one left is the direction that we put our needle in. So now we know kind of what we're using. When we're going to make one right, I'm going to use the point of my left needle, and I am going to lift that bar up from back to front. Can you see that it now sort of creates almost like a sort of a curvy kind of V on my needle there? So I've picked up the bar. Then all I'm going to do is I'm actually just going to knit in to the front of that stitch. So I kind of use the tip of my other needle to pull it out a bit to give me space, and I just, because it is tricky because you're just creating it's quite a tight little stitch you're creating, so don't worry if you need to kind of pull it about a bit to get your needle in. And I'm just going to be making that stitch, as I said, in clay. So see, fingers and thumbs, quite honestly. I'm going to give that another go. I'm going to be making my stitch in clay. And if I can't pick it, there we go. When I get that off the needle tip, you can see there is a stitch there that wasn't there before. Okay, stitch there that wasn't there before. There's my central, poor old thing, look, being stretched out of all proportion. There's my central thumb stitch, and I'm just going to work that in the normal way because that is left alone on my chart. That remains constant throughout. It is untouched, nothing happens to that fella all the way through. Now at this point we've got a bit of a situation because I've come to the end of stitches on my needle. I've got nothing there and I've got to make an increase. It doesn't matter because that bar still exists even though the next stitch is kind of sitting on the cable. That bar is still there. Let me show you. If I use my needle, you can see. Did you see where I picked that up? I don't know. I'll do that again because I can't really see the screen too well. It's that little bar. If I stretch, it's that little bar that's running from the stitch. You can see it's kind of attached really well from that stitch to the next one, which just happens to be sitting on a cable. Makes it a little bit easier in a lot of ways, and I'll tell you why. Because on this one, where I worked before, on the make one right, I put my needle from back to front. I'm just going to put my needle from front to back on that one. So just literally sticking my needle front to back as if I was going to knit that bar. But this time I'm going to knit it through the back loop. The make one left, you knit into the back loop. Quite simple, just goes in the back. That's where the front is. That's where the back is. And the fortunate thing about this needle sitting on that cable is it's not quite as tight. This time I'm just going to throw that round there. Okay, so now when I go back and look at my thumb stitched, remember our good old faithful blue stitch going up the middle? you can now see it's got a little neighbour either side of it. The one to the right is the make one right, and the one to the left is the make one left. What I'm going to do is I'm going to work all the way around until to the not the next round, but the one after, and we're going to just do that again really quickly. Oh, I'm sorry, I'm back again for a brief interlude. I'm not on an increase round. I just wanted to show you what happens when you get to your next round and you've got to work those stitches. So it's only a tiny thing. I've put my stitch marker back in just because my brain can't cope with the fact that they're thumb stitches. It might help you, it might not. So I'm just working the last few of the stitches for the mitten part. So now there's my stitch marker, so I know what's coming next are thumb stitches. And when I look, there they are, 3 of them. And all I'm doing on this one is following the pattern of the colour that's there already. So if it's clay, I'm making it clay, and if it's seafarer, I'm making it seafarer. So that is all that happens on the rounds that are not increase rounds. You just knit those stitches exactly as they are already. So that's nice and straightforward, isn't it? So let's go on to another increase round. Right, I'm now coming towards the end of my first needle, so the first side of round 22, which means we are on an increase round. Now, as I said to you, on the thumb you increase every other round, which means kind of all the even rounds for now. I'll just show you the pattern so you can see. And I'm going to hold this one up a bit. It's tricky to see on this one because our increase round is our increased stitch. You can see we worked the last round. There's the stitch in clay, seafarer, clay, and all of a sudden we found a new seafarer either side, which means our increase on this one has got to be blue, which I think is intuitive because, as we talked about, we've got a stripy thumb going on. So we need to keep those alternate colours working, don't we? So there's my stitch marker to say I'm now going to be working my thumb. I'm going to move that to one side for now. So you can see very clearly my first stitch of my thumb is now in clay, which means my increase is going to be in seafarer. So it's on the right of the centre, which means I've got to do a, yes, that's correct, folks, a make one right. And in this case, my little bar between the two, you can see, is now in the clay colour. Okay, so I've put my needle tip, my left needle tip has gone from back to front under that bar. There's that little V like we had before, but this time I am working that stitch with the blue, with the seafarer. So I'm going to be working, like I said, just giving that a little pull. I'm going to be working into the front, knitting into the front of the stitch in a normal way in seafarer. So I've maintained my stripe because the next stitch along is clay. Then I've got another seafarer. Then I've got another clay. And now I've got to do my increase. And it's to the left of centre, so it is a make one left. And if you remember on this one, because of how I've set it up, so I'm working all my thumb stitches on my first needle, that bar is really easy to get to. It's a lot looser because it's sitting between a needle and a cable. And because it's a make one left, I just put my needle in from front to back, but I knit into the back of the stitch. Now again, let's just have a little look. There's my stripe pattern, clay, seafarer, clay, oh sorry, no, it doesn't start there. Seafarer, clay, and now I obviously need to make this seafarer. So because I'm making one left, I'm going to knit into the back of the stitch with seafarer. So let's just look, that is where my mitten ends, and those 5 stitches are thumb stitches, and you can see we've maintained the stripe there throughout. What I do is when I knit back round, I pop my stitch marker back on the next round, so I don't slip anything off needles and put it on or anything. But it's easy to do that. Let me show you. I'm just going to slip my needle, my thumb stitches from my right needle to my left needle, thus, and pop my stitch marker back on. It just helps me. Whoops. I cannot do it, folks. Oh, there we go. It just helps me to remember where my thumb stitches are, and it makes it dead easy to know what colour I'm working my increases in when I've got to work them. So there we go. We've now gone from having three thumb stitches to having 5 thumb stitches. Okay, so if we look at our pattern, we continue in this vein all the way up, increasing, and it's lovely because at this point the width of the chart is correct in that we've got a stitch going all the way across it. Then they abruptly stop. What the heckity heck happens here? Shall we find out? Okay, I'm going to finish knitting this mitten till all of these increases are done, and then we're going to find out why it just drops off a cliff here. Okay, don't panic, it's all good. I'll see you then.